The 2025 season is a big one for TCU and Sonny Dykes. This is a team that kind of surprised people in 2024. Now they head into the 2025 season with a ton of momentum. They have the quarterback coming back that some other teams wanted, but they kept him. They kept him on campus, and now they're ready to make some noise in the Big 12, maybe even get back to the college football playoff. Today, we take a deep dive into the TCU Horned Frogs and look at what we should expect from this team this season. Sonny Dykes has been through plenty of ups and downs with TCU, and going into last year, there was definitely some concerns about where this program was headed. And I think some people thought that this was going to be a group that struggled, but they exceeded expectations. And the second half was a strong half of the season for them. It's a team that I think thrived towards the end of the season, and it's a big reason why some of us are excited about them. Now, there are still plenty of doubters that remain, but this is a team that is definitely capable of making a run this year. Kendall Briles is back. Andy Avalos made the defense into something that was a little bit more respectable than what we've seen in the past. And I think they're ready to take another step. I think both sides are ready to have an exciting year. And we'll obviously dive into the talent that's going to make that happen. But also at the same time, this coaching staff deserves a lot of credit. Kendall Briles' offense is so much fun to watch. The ability to make explosive plays is going to keep people interested, keep the fans in their seats, and make this team a dangerous team. Andy Avalos, he made the most of his situation after getting fired from Boise State. Ultimately, then lands at TCU for a defensive coordinator position, and he has run with it. He has made it his own, and I think that this staff and this program really like where they are headed. In terms of the talent that was lost and retained, you didn't lose a ton of talent. The wide receiver position obviously took a big hit. You lose Savion Williams and Jack Best to the NFL. You lose JoJo Earl, JP Richardson. That's going to hurt. Obviously, Drake Dabney wasn't exactly what they thought he was going to be, but he's gone as well. And Cam Cook hitting the transfer portal, that had part to do with probably the rushing attack not being what we thought it could be. But as you can see, the skill positions on offense took a bit of a hit. Everything else feels like it's in a pretty good place. The only other position that maybe you saw a big hit would be defensive line. Maybe you can make an argument for the secondary as well. But overall, I think you should feel pretty good about the retainment of talent. And then they didn't bring in a ton of players from the transfer portal, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that in this day and age, being able to keep their transfers that you need lower tells you that you're doing a good job of recruiting. And maybe that is the case, but we'll see. They addressed the wide receiver position in the transfer portal. They address the tight end position. They bring in a couple of linemen on both sides that are going to make an impact. They're looking to bolster that rushing attack. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll see where this group can go. But again, bringing in only a handful of transfers kind of speaks to where this program is, where they feel they've done well. And recruiting is definitely one of those areas. And that's really exciting for a team, like I said, that's going to try to make a run in the Big 12, a Big 12 that is wide open. And a big reason for that is going to be Josh Hoover. Now, Josh Hoover is one of my favorite quarterbacks in college football. I think that a lot of people are still sleeping on him. And I think that this is a guy who is ready to take another step. Almost threw for 4,000 yards last year, 27 touchdowns. You'd like to see him reduce those interceptions. But again, with his first full year as a starter, there were going to be some growing pains. And hopefully you feel like he's going to learn from that. He's going to be able to take a step in terms of his maturity, his decision making. Those are things that I think are going to be huge for him this year. Now, at the same time, he is going to go through a transition with the guys he has to throw to. Losing Savion Williams and Jack Best hurts a ton. So you're going to have to find new guys to hit downfield. But there is a reason why Tennessee allegedly, I don't know if it's been confirmed or not, but wanted Josh Hoover. And probably a lot of teams were looking at trying to get him at some point. You can see the talent. You can see his ability. I mean, you don't just get that kind of production by being an average quarterback. Now he comes back. He's got another year under his belt. a full year of the Ken Bryo system as the guy. That's really exciting if you're a TCU fan. And that's going to present a ton of problems for the teams that TCU faces. The depth behind him, Ken Seals is back, another guy that probably could have gone somewhere else to potentially start somewhere, but he comes back to be the backup. I think you see a drop off if Josh Hoover goes down with an injury and whatnot. So you're hoping obviously that he stays healthy, that everything goes well there, because otherwise you're looking at some inexperienced players or a drop off in talent. Maybe Adam Schobel is going to be the guy, but you don't want to go to him this early. Josh Hoover is going to give you the best chance for success, and the passing attack, which finished 8th last year, is going to want him to be that big time player like we saw in 2024. Now the rushing attack is where you need to see improvement. And this is probably going to be a by committee approach here. And there's 4 guys that are definitely going to be involved. Who you think the starter is, I probably don't have an argument against it. Trent Battle, Jeremy Payne, Kavorian Bards comes in from UTSA, and Nate Palmer. Those are guys that are going to get opportunities to run the football. They're going to get their chances to run the ball, and they are going to show which one of them is going to be a majority ball carrier. But for now, we just don't know. And for now, that's okay. A 4-way battle is not necessarily a bad thing. A 4-way battle could help someone emerge as that go-to guy. Now, I know a lot of people are high on Nate Palmer. He was a young guy that stepped in and was kind of thrust into a role early last year. But this is a unit that finished 113th in rushing, and that's not going to get the job done. You can rely on Josh Hoover for a lot of things. You cannot rely on him to do everything. This offense needs to find balance, and it was honestly kind of surprising. I feel like Kent Ryle's offenses are usually pretty good at running the football, so it was a little bit of surprising to see, especially with Cam Cook, to see this group take a little bit of a step back. It's not exactly what we thought it was going to be, but sometimes that happens. That it's college football. The weirder things have happened. There's strange things that happen all the time, and you just got to figure it out. Hopefully this depth here, that's the one thing, is that they feel good about 4 guys. That gives you good depth. Now, how you raise the ceiling is the big question, but there's plenty of options if you have one guy go down. You don't necessarily have to worry about what happens to your group if somebody goes down. You feel like you have 4 good options. So even if one guy doesn't emerge, you're essentially keeping that floor pretty high. You're not losing a ton. Maybe your ceiling isn't as high as it is going to be, but your floor does not go down because of the guys you have returning. Now, we mentioned the passing attack and the turnover that we're going to see in this group. But one thing that we need to touch on is we need to talk about Eric McAllister. Eric McAllister came from Boise State to TCU. And I think there are a lot of concerns about if he was going to translate or not. All he has done is prove everybody wrong. And that was with Savion Williams and Jack Besh commanding most of the attention. Now, you can make an argument maybe that he benefited from more favorable matchups. Maybe the secondary wasn't really worried about him. You can make an argument there, but I think he is someone who is a big-time threat downfield. I think that he is going to push 1,000 yards this year, and especially right off the bat with some new faces coming in, you're going to see Josh Hoover probably look his way a little bit more because that's what he knows, that's what he's comfortable with, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but everybody else feels relatively unproven. Now, Jordan Bailey does come back as well. You also have a guy in Braylon James who only caught 3 passes. So the guys who do come back don't have a ton of production. Major Everhart could be one of those guys. Another guy to keep an eye on, Dozie Ezukana. You're looking at a unproven player with a lot of potential. He's a young guy who is ready to step up and play a bigger role. And from everything I've read and everything I've heard, it sounds like they think he has big playability. Bringing in Joseph Manjack IV, that's a solid addition. Again, another one of those, you kind of raise the floor. And in the Big 12, maybe raising the floor isn't a bad thing. Raising your floor for more consistency could be a good thing if you're trying to win more football games. So that's something that you could feel good about if you're a TCU fan. You have plenty of returning guys. It's just who's going to be that option behind Eric McAllister. You also bring in Jordan Dwyer from Idaho, over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns last year. Then you go to the tight end position. DJ Rogers is a big target downfield. You also bring in Kamorian Pimpton from LSU. So banking on maybe some of that potential. Chase Curtis is another option who had a couple of catches last year. Pretty good production. So again, you have options, but right now it's a relatively unproven group. And this is where that balance comes in. And I talk about almost in every single video I've done, I think I talk about the need for balance. And yes, you can rely on a passing attack a little bit more. I'm not saying you have to be 50-50, but teams need that balance. You need to have a rushing attack that is solid. It doesn't have to be the most elite unit, but you need guys to be able to run the football. And right now, with the unproven talent at wide receiver in this passing attack, you probably want the rushing attack to take a step forward because the passing attack might need some time to gel. Timing, running routes, all that stuff with your quarterback will take time. And the rushing attack for now might be leaned upon early on to get things kind of steadied while everybody else figures things out. Part of that's also on the offensive line. That's not really a surprise, but this is a group that returns quite a bit of talent and quite a bit of experience. You do not lose a ton of players that were major contributors. Now, losing James Rockermeyer, that's a tough one to lose, but you replace him with Colton Deary. Colton Deary slides into center, and they feel really good about his ability to make a seamless transition. Cade Bennett comes back after missing all of last year with an injury. Carson Bruno is the other guard. And then the tackles are feeling like they're in pretty good position. Ryan Hughes is someone who I think is going to have to prove himself. Ben Taylor Whitfield had good experience last year. And with a quarterback that coming back in Josh Hoover, having this experience up front should make you very comfortable watching this offense. Even with the skill positions needed to figure things out, having this experience in the trenches kind of calms those nerves. It makes you less concerned about what's going to happen going forward. It makes you less concerned about what this group needs to prove. And you feel like you have pretty good depth pieces behind them as well if something were to happen. It's a physical game. Injuries happen. Inconsistent play happens. So bringing in a guy like Rashid Jackson from Incarnate Word, though he doesn't have the FBS experience, he is someone that they are really excited about, could even push for some starting time. Quentin Harris's experience, you bring in back a good guy in Cooper Powers that has plenty of game experience as well. Remington Strickland's in that realm as well. So you have good experience everywhere. So that should honestly, it should make you feel pretty comfortable with even with the turnover. It's a new year. Some of these guys are in different positions. Some of these guys are healthy. So there might be a little bit of time where they need some chemistry. They need to sort out that chemistry, find how they communicate with each other. But overall, I think if you're a TCU fan, you should feel pretty good about where your offense is headed because of those key pieces. Your quarterback is back. The running back group has quite a bit of talent and good depth. The offensive line is solid. The wide receiver position, though it has plenty of new faces, has an absolute stud at wide receiver 1. So you're not necessarily worried too much about it, though you do understand that there are some things that need to be sorted out before you play North Carolina. Flipping over to the defense, to Andy Avalos' group, this is a really fun side of the ball, and I really like what this defense could be. Could be a much better group than it was last year, and it starts up front. Now, how you want to say this defense plays, what kind of style they play, what scheme they play, I'm not really going to argue with that. We'll leave it at the 3-3-5, understanding that in this day and age, you can put an outside linebacker on the line, and they're probably going to do that quite a bit. Zachary Chapman's probably the big X factor on this defensive line. The former defensive tackle, 3 technique, moves out to the edge to play defensive end. That'll be an interesting transition, but it seems like he's got that kind of figured out. Paul Oyewale was hurt all last year, so he did not play. That's a good depth piece to have back despite his time that he missed. And then on the interior is where you feel really excited about what TCU could do this year. You feel like they have 2 guys that can be absolute game wreckers, game changers up front. Even with a good year last year, I think Marcus Deal has just scratched the surface of what he's capable of doing. He's a big frame guy at 6'5", 325 pounds, moves really well for a guy his size. And when you turn on the film, you see a guy that's constantly in the backfield, a guy who is constantly making life miserable for the guy that he plays against. And that's going to open things up for the guys behind them, open up things for the guys around him. Bringing in Ansel Din Mumba is another guy that's going to be disruptive, and he benefits from Deals. They both kind of benefit from having each other line up next to one another. And Din Mumba, 24 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 6 sacks last year with Washington State. That's a disruptive player that you want in your defense. And Marcus Deal is probably not going to have the stats like that, but he's going to make up for that in other ways. He's going to play at a high level. It just won't show up in the box score. That's a good starting group. Now, the depth behind them maybe is where you have some concerns. You bring in a couple of community college guys, Kelton Mickle, Perry Cole Jr., Tristan Johnson's another name to keep an eye on. But there's plenty of excitement when it comes to the defensive line. The defensive line is obviously going to where everything starts up front. And if you're going to finish better than 83rd defending the run, it's going to have to be the guys up front. And they feel like they have a good group. And you could also add, if you go to the linebacker position, Devin Deal is another guy that could be a contributor up front. Now, they'll line him up in multiple different places, multiple different positions. So he's not necessarily going to be your traditional defensive end or edge player, but he's more than capable of doing that. The former Tulane transfer had a good year in 2024. And that was another guy who, I mean, you look at Tulane. Tulane has produced a number of NFL draft picks, a number of really good transfer portal players. Devin Deal is one of them. 46 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. A guy who is absolutely ferocious on the edge. A guy who can be extremely disruptive. And another player that if you're worried about the defensive line, and you have to send extra help to those guys, then Devin Deal is just going to eat you alive. He is just going to destroy anything that you're trying to do. And that makes it even more difficult to block this group. Another thing that we get to see is we get another year of Nnamdi Obiazor because of the Diego Pavia rule, if you will, the JUCO transfer rule. And then Caleb Elarms-Orr, a very underrated player in last year's transfer portal class. This is a guy who is getting plenty of Power 4 attention and plenty of attention from teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. So this is a big time get for them, and he is back for another year. So you feel like you have a good group of linebackers, and it'll just come down to who are the guys behind them that'll step up. Max Carroll and Travis Jackson are ready to prove themselves once again. Pretty solid years for both of them. Not going to be major contributors in 2024, but they found ways to make an impact and be efficient with their limited time. After that, the D2 transfer, Caleb Cortez, that'll be interesting to see if he can handle that transition. Jonathan Bax, you have good options again, but unproven options for the most part. So the linebacker position is in good hands. And I think that if the defensive line lives up to the hype, then you feel like this is a defense that will take that step forward. They will make a better impact on this team. And like I said, with the skill position talent that the offense needs to figure out, maybe your defense has to step up in a way because the offense is taking some time to sort things out. So those are things that are just good to have. It's just a good backup option in case your plan A doesn't work. And then you have a plan B that's in a good place. Flipping back to the secondary, this was already going to be a really exciting group. And then they bring in Elijah Jackson. That's a nice get for them. And, a guy who only played 8 games last year, but 2 years ago for Washington, this is a guy who was a major contributor in a team that was making a lot of noise in college football. They had a very successful year. The playoff run was really exciting, and he was a big reason for that. You put him opposite of Channing Canada, who had had a lot of good experience. A lot of that might have had to do with Avery Helm's injury. Avery Helm was back after missing an injury for the whole year because of an injury in fall camp. So that's a good duo to have. You have a good backup in Avery Helm that can step in right away. The safeties are going to be loaded. Bud Clark is an absolute playmaker. Every single year that he has played, he has made plays, and he is back for one final season. Jamel Johnson considered going to the transfer portal, but comes back. And then the nickel position will be kind of up for grabs, whether it's Austin Jordan, maybe it's going to be Jordan Lester. You have a couple guys that are going to fight for that position, but the other guys feel like they're relatively set as of right now. You brought in LSU transfer Kylan Jackson at the safety position. Caden McFadden is back. So we'll see if those guys can get into the rotation behind Clark and Johnson. But again, those two guys are pretty much set there. Vernon Glover's another corner that they like. Javon McIver also in that boat. So I think that they're in a good place. This is a fun secondary. And honestly, Bud Clark to me is one of the most underrated defensive backs in college football. I don't think a lot of people are talking about him. And we haven't talked really about him since he had that pick 6 against JJ McCarthy in the college football playoff. We really haven't talked about him. And all he's done is made plays. He's had multiple interceptions since that time. And that just kind of gets unnoticed for whatever reason. So that's really where I like this group, because it's an overlooked group, in my opinion. It's an underappreciated group, and obviously they have to do certain things to play better. But I think this is a group that could take a step forward and be a really fun defense in 2025. It's going to be tough in the Big 12. Life in the Big 12, as we saw last year, it's anybody's game. It is up for anyone to take, and that means you have to have your A game. And I think one thing that I liked that TCU did was raising their floor of what they're capable of playing. And if they're able to continue that, if they're able to play at that level and play at a consistent level where you don't necessarily have to worry about some, drop-offs in play, some lapses in decision making, I think that this is going to be a really fun group, but we'll see. The schedule is going to be interesting, and right now the over-under is set at 6.5. In my opinion, that feels kind of disrespectful. I know the Big 12 is very good, and there are plenty of teams that will be a reason why that's hard to win more than 6.5 games. So we'll just dive into it. North Carolina, I don't think anybody knows what North Carolina is going to be. Then you get a bye week, everybody's favorite bye week, week 2. And then you go Abilene Christian and SMU. SMU is a team that played for the college football playoff last year. Same with Arizona State. You go at Arizona State right after that. That's a tough 2-game stretch. Colorado, we don't really know what they're going to be, though we expect them to take a step back. At Kansas State, that's a tough road trip. And honestly, this is probably why the 6.5 is here. Your road trips this year are North Carolina, Arizona State, Kansas State, West Virginia, BYU, and Houston. West Virginia and Houston are probably 2 worst teams of those, but West Virginia is always tough to beat on the road. Houston's going to be a bounce back team. BYU, Kansas State, and Arizona State will all compete for the Big 12 title. But again, that's where if TCU embraces that underdog role, they'll be just fine. Your home games after the Colorado include Baylor, Iowa State, and Cincinnati. Baylor and Iowa State, 2 more teams that are going to compete for the Big 12 championship. So it still feels disrespectful at 6.5, but then when you dive into the schedule, you kind of understand it. You kind of see, okay, well, that's playing a lot of good teams, and you have to play really good football, and they have the ability to do that, but how consistent can they be? Right now, I have the ceiling at 9-3. That would be a really good year. With this schedule, going 9-3 would be very impressive, especially because the Big 12 feels like their champion is going to have at least 2 losses. The floor, though, I think is 6-6. Like I said, what I was talking about before, raising that floor. 6-6 obviously would be disappointing, but again, put some context into that season. The schedule they have is not exactly the easiest. It's not favorable by any means. So going 6-6 would be an accomplishment, but would people be able to add that context to it to understand that? Now, the channel thinks that they're going to finish somewhere 5th through 8th. 68% of you think that's going to happen. 16% think 1st through 4th. That is where, going 9-3 is kind of in that boat. 11% think 9th through 12th. 5%, I think, believe that Sonny Dykes is getting fired this year because they think 13th through 16th. So plenty of variety, but a majority think towards the top of the conference, just not necessarily 1 through 4. And that's really where this team kind of sits. That's where that 6.5 kind of puts them. You have a team that is very capable of going 9-3, but you're in a conference that is extremely competitive. That being said, I think there's a lot of guys that are being overlooked. Josh Hoover, Eric McAllister, Bud Clark. You have a number of players that can make big time plays. Can they make enough this year is going to be the big question. If they do, 9-3 is going to be more likely than 6-6.